Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi there. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Karl Forehand, and we have a guest that, I've never met her, but I am happy that we get a chance to talk to her today. Have you met Marla?
Well, Joe Beth said I should interview
Marla,
and so I took Joe Beth's advice, and her publisher also I talked to the other day. So on good authority, we're going to have a fun conversation here.
Sounds good. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Marla Taviano is into books, love, justice, globes, anti-racism, blue, gray, rainbows, poems, and 100 other things. She reads and writes for a living and a life. She's a mom to some freaking awesome kids, wears her heart on her t-shirts, and is on a mission, quest, and journey to live wholefartedly. And that is not a typo. And I cannot wait to dive into that a little bit. And that she is a big fan of parentheses and end dashes. So that sounds amazing. Welcome so much to the podcast, Marla. We are glad that you are here, and we can't wait to talk to you about all the things that you have going on.
Thank you, Karl and Laura. I was trying so hard not to laugh while you're talking. We're like, we don't know her. Well, Joe Beth said she was all right. Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Kind of how our brains work.
We are very trusting, and we figure when we hear good things about someone, then they're okay with us, and we can't wait to have this discussion with you.
So
I'm excited too.
Marla's previous books, Jaded is a poetic reckoning with white evangelical Christian indoctrination. Another previous book, Unbelieve, poems on the journey to become a heretic. Like that too. But her current book that we'll talk about just a little bit later after her story is Whole, poems on reclaiming the pieces of ourselves and creating something new. And once again, welcome to the podcast. We're deeply grateful that you took an hour to come talk to us here in the Desert Sanctuary.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And I ask you to do something, if you will, because I don't like to read other people's books to them. If you would, just share this Gray is My Love Language. It's on your main page, and I assume it's important to you. So could you read that to us to get us kicked off and started?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that ahead of time, because I can never find my poems in my books. And it always feels kind of embarrassing that I realize I have like 600 poems, so it'd be tricky. Okay, This one is from my first book, Unbelieve, and it's called Gray is My Love Language. Gray is my love language. I thought everything was black and white, right or wrong, so good or so bad. This year, I painted my bedroom gray and bought myself gray bedding. I've loved gray for a lot of years now, and I've finally realized why. It's soothing, non-binary, calming, non-conforming, nuanced, mysterious. And as far as light wavelengths go, it's a mix of every color and no colors, literally all inclusive. That's a gray area. Used to seem threatening. And now I'm all, ooh, gray area. Where? Yay.
Good. That's really good. I
like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Marla, one of our things here at the Desert Sanctuary, we've interviewed over 300 people, and we think that all of those stories are sacred. That when someone is trusting enough to share their story with us, we take it really seriously. We that kind of affects us deeply. We learn from them, and we just get to commune with others through those deep stories. So we wanted you in as much detail as you can, or whatever detail you decide to do it, just to let us know who you are, your story, where you came from, your deconstruction, if that's a word for you. But what's your story?
Excuse me. Yes, I love stories too, and I never know what I'm going to say when someone asks for my story. It's all true. It just depends on what's going to come out as I talk, and then if anything piques your interest, we can talk more about that. But I am 48 years old, a fairly recent single mom of three young adult girls, women, and I live in Columbia, South Carolina, but I lived in Ohio for 39 years, Cambodia for 5 years, and now South Carolina for 4. So I moved here on the last plane out of Siem Reap, Cambodia at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020
Oh,
to
wow.
a new state. So backing up, I was born to white evangelical conservative Christian parents in 1975. For most of my life, I would have just called them Christian parents. I didn't realize that I needed all of those descriptors to set our particular brand of Christianity apart from all of the others. And so when you mentioned my second book, Jaded, and that reckoning with white evangelical Christian indoctrination, I added all of that because I've realized it's not Christianity as a whole is not mine to throw out. I can only throw out the version that I was given and that I have found to be toxic and harmful for a lot of different reasons. But I was a poster child for Christianity. I was such a good Christian girl. I was smart and I used my smartness for Jesus. I was kind and loving. I used that for Jesus. Like all the good things for me, I used for Jesus. And all of the not so great things about me, I just tried really, really hard to push those down and not be selfish and not be this and not be that. And so I went to a Christian college after I graduated from my small public high school, but a lot of my teachers were Christians. There were 71 students in my graduating class, tiny little town in Ohio. Go to a Christian college. And then I worked at a church camp. I met my future husband, who is now my ex-husband. We got married in 1998, went on to have 3 girls in 2000, 2002, and 2006. And I don't have enough time to tell you all of the ministries that we were involved in. We helped plant churches. We were missionaries overseas. We volunteered for all kinds of organizations, started ministries, on and on and on and on. And when I do give that extensive list, sometimes I always make sure I add in that I was a Christian clown when I was 8. So I started way, way back there doing all kinds of ministry things. So speeding all that up, it was around 2009, 2010. I was at the pool with my kids and reading a book called The Hole in Our Gospel by a man named Richard Stearns. And he was basically saying, the good news is not good news to an orphan in Uganda if you're not giving him food and shelter and medical care. And I had always believed that the Republicans were Christians, the Democrats were not. The Democrats talked about loving people and all this. And I'm like, well, the most important thing, is saving their souls from hell. And so I was a loving person. I just knew that the most important thing was salvation, not food, until I really started thinking about that and thinking, oh, that's great for me. I have food and everything I need. So salvation is kind of a little bonus for me. And what I'm going to go over to other countries or even here in this country and tell impoverished people that all they need is Jesus and not meet their physical needs. So that kind of turned things upside down. Fast forward to 2012 when Trayvon Martin was killed. We had just helped friends of ours plant a multi-ethnic church. And this Black friend of mine put on Facebook, why are my white friends not talking about Trayvon Martin? I didn't know what she was talking about. I Googled it. That sent me on this path of waking up really to racism in this country, white supremacy. And they talk about the slippery slope. They say that once you start to unravel things, it's all going to come undone. That is those are facts. Like, that is absolutely true. And what I try to tell people is, listen, if all of this starts to unravel, maybe it wasn't so great and sturdy in the first place. So that's a big thing that I do now, is just encourage people to not be afraid, and not because it's not scary. It is scary. And so my books of poetry, I've been writing for a long time. I have I have 4 traditionally published books from 2006, 7, 8, and 9 with Christian publishers, and they are about marriage, sex, motherhood, pregnancy. Basically, me in all of my like 6 to 7 years of marriage I had under my belt at the time, instructing women on how to be the best, most submissive wives that they could, and to sacrifice themselves for their marriage and their children. So I sometimes wish that those did not exist, but they are actually my receipts that I am not someone who is just trying to destroy someone's Christianity for no good reason. And of all the people who have come to me and said, well, you must not really have been a Christian in the first place if you're deconstructing your faith, I have 4 books that prove it. I have 62 journals to God that prove it. I was, like I said, the poster child. I was one of the best Christians on the planet. So that's what I've come to find that is common among people who are deconstructing. It's often the people who are the most serious, the most zealous, because our hearts were in the right place. We were doing this for a reason. And hopefully that reason was we really cared about people. We really love people. We really want to do what's right and fair. And then waking up to the fact that, oh, this isn't right, or this isn't fair. And then starting to dive deeper into the Bible. Whereas people who might say that they can't affirm gay marriage or whatever it is because of these verses. And then it's the people who have studied the verses even more deeply that can give reasons why it's okay. For me personally, and I'll skip to the end, I don't actually care what the Bible says anymore about something. I don't care what a book written 2,000 years ago by different people in a different time, in a different place, not even to me. Right. That doesn't matter to me. But I realize that it does still matter to many, many people. And I just wrote a post on Instagram to dear conservative Christian parents, encouraging them to become queer affirming, because their kid could be queer. Like, the chances of that being true are very high. And so I realize that there's some people who need to still have biblical basis for things. And so I think that can be found too. But as of right now, it took me a while to say I'm not a Christian anymore. I was like, I'll just hold on to it, just for in case I need it. But it doesn't really seem fair or true to say it anymore, because, like I just told you, I don't care what the Bible says about that. So can I still be a Christian and not care? Maybe, maybe not. But it's always going to be in me, a part of me. It's my history. And I'm still working through all of that and what it means. But on the other side of that, it is just, there's so much freedom, so much wholeness. And like I said, I don't lie to people and tell them, hey, come on over. It's so easy to get here. You're going to love it when you get here. That's not true. But anytime I tell people I am more me, I am more whole, I am more free, that is 100% true. 100% true. And I just got so sick and tired of trying to hold on to the Bible and love people. And I just made that choice. I'm going to love people. Some people can do both. I didn't have the energy to do that. And so I gave that up. But I've always been writing about my experiences, and this was no different, except that things, when you're very certain about marriage and how you should be and submitting to your husband, you can write a book pretty easily. When everything is shifting and changing and you try to write a book, that's a lot harder. And that's how it turned into poetry. It's not traditional poetry. It's very unconventional poetry. A lot of it is, this is kind of a Facebook post, and now I've turned it into a poem. So it's really accessible. There's nothing there that you wouldn't understand. But that's how it became poetry. I couldn't keep track of all of the things that were changing. So instead of trying to say it all, I just said less, and that turned out to be poetry.
Yeah.
That was going to be one of my questions, is how did you transition from writing books in the traditional sense that we think of books to poetry? But that question you answered. And then something else I was thinking while you were talking is I feel like the word Christian has, I don't know what the right word is, has been like hijacked to be something that it's really not. And I am with you. I don't really label myself as a Christian. But if we think about Christ, if we really think about, his love for people, and it just didn't matter across the board, like, to me, that is what it means to be a Christian. So I agree with you. Like, in this day and age, for me, that label does not hold any meaning to me because of what it has turned into. That's just a side note, kind of my thoughts on that. But and I don't know that I really need to put myself in a corner with any type of label. I mean, that is something through my deconstruction that I've like tried to go, okay, well then what am I? If I'm not a Christian, am I an atheist? Am I an agnostic? What am I? And I think I've just come to the point where it's like the freedom that you're talking about to just be who you are and not necessarily have some sort of label attached to that has allowed me to be more loving, more affirming. And that's really what I want to be in the end anyway. So, but thank you for sharing that part of your story, because I think that will resonate with so many people that listen to the podcast.
Yeah, as far as labels go, and again, I don't do much of that either. I do like agnostic just because it means I don't know. And I feel like if we were being truthful, we're all agnostic to some degree. We can pretend we know. And that's the thing. People ask me, what do you miss about being a Christian? And I would sometimes say I miss the certainty of like knowing that God is going to do this is going to be like, and then realizing I never had that certainty. I convinced myself that I had it and I didn't. So agnostic, if people really want to know, I will say that. I'm definitely not an atheist. And I have a poem about that too, where I don't know how to atheist. Like I don't know how to take that big leap. And again, that feels too much like people are going to ask me to prove that there's no God. I don't want to prove anything. If I say I don't know, to prove a thing. And that's not a cop-out to me. It is the truth. The truth is I do not know. And even things that I've said, I don't believe in hell anymore. And people ask, are you sure about that? What I'm sure about is that I am not serving a God who created an eternal torment of fire for people who don't say a prayer and choose to follow Jesus. That's what I'm sure of. Is there one there? I don't know. But if there is, I'm not following that God. If that God created that place and has the power to send me there, well, there's nothing I can do about that. But I'm not living my life in pursuit of or in worship of a God who would do that. Heaven, same thing. I miss the certainty of I'm going to go to heaven with all of the people I love when I die. Well, I never really had that certainty. None of us do. We do not know what is going to happen. And even the Bible, people who read the Bible and believe it, the Bible gives us literally nothing about heaven. People read into it, they make up things, and it's scary. And there's a lot of anxiety, but I had a lot of anxiety as a Christian. God allowed a lot of crappy, I don't know if you cuss on this podcast, allowed a lot of shitty things to happen to me when I was the very best Christian. So I'm not actually worried about what God is going to allow to happen to me now that I've said goodbye.
We just interviewed Derek Webb, and who was the lead singer, one of the founders of Caedmon's Call. He has since has his own solo career, but he said the exact same thing about agnostics, that we really all are agnostics about things in our lives because we don't know. And, and then he said something about the word atheist was, he likes the word agnostic better because it's like you're a learner. You're always like you're open to new things. I hope I'm saying that right.
You don't have enough evidence
right
to prove Christianity. You also don't have enough evidence to be an atheist.
Yeah, atheism is kind of like certainty in itself.
Yeah,
the type of certainty.
Kind of the opposite of it, theist and anti-theist. But
really quickly, I'd like to go on a little Derek Webb tangent.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I absolutely loved Caven's Call back in my Christian days. And then I remember reading about Derek Webb and seeing that he was thinking some different things, whatever. But last year, a friend of mine and I went to a house concert that he had in a neighboring city here in South Carolina. So it's just like 30 of us in this living room, and he's doing a concert with his new songs on the album that hadn't come out yet. And I actually took a copy of Jaded and I left it in my car because I was nervous to give it to him because I wrote a poem about him in Jaded. And my friend said, you got to give it to him. I'm like, that's weird. Like, you give someone a book that you wrote at their concert.
I do it all the time.
So afterward, when there was like a meet and greet and he was signing things, and I bought a vinyl album, and I told my friend, I was like, I'm going to go out to the car and get the book. So I did. And I showed it to him. But he had said something once in a podcast about, and I'm not going to get this right either, but God doesn't get everything in the divorce.
Yes,
like when you
said that on our podcast.
Yeah. And I loved that. Okay, so then the song that he sang about Paul, how, I don't know if you've listened to that song, but where Paul never meant for us to, like, what would Paul do if he knew what we were doing? That's a huge thing with me. When he sang that song and I'm sitting like right a few feet away from him, it just gave me chills because that's what I want people to see. Like, people that quote Paul at me constantly. And it's like, Paul had no idea about me or the United States of America or anything. So then you're telling me about Flamey Grant and Derek and Flamey are doing all this great stuff. There's a poem about Flamey in my new book. And my friend Cynthia Vaca Davis, and this is again another tangent, but she wrote a book called Intersection, and it's about an intersex individual who Cynthia actually lost her job at a Christian college because she became affirming, and she wrote this story with her friend, and it's beautiful. And we just met in real life a couple weeks ago, and she had just come from Nashville where she was in Flamey's new music video. She was one of the protesters that it's like down with Shimmer and then at the end it's like up with Shimmer. Anyway, so I love that you mentioned that at the beginning because I love what they're doing and the way that they just share things with love. And it really is true that love is the way that we're gonna conquer this hate. I'm fine with being sarcastic and snotty and pushing back, but also realizing I just want to love people. So I'm going to love people that conservative Christians don't want to love, and I'm going to love them hard, and it's going to be fun, and we're going to have a party. And so I really love Derek and Flamey. Yeah. Anyway, okay, back to our regularly scheduled
programs. Yeah. So what stood out in your story to me this morning, I was writing a blog, which I do occasionally. And I wanted to talk about what's important in a leader. So I'm thinking about the coming election, things like that. And I want to point out those things. What's important in a leader? What do we really need from a leader? And it ended up being called How Taylor is Better Than Trump. And speaking of Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And as I thought, well, there's going to be 7 or 8 things, or maybe it'll be a top 10 leadership qualities. But the reason I titled it the way I did, because it ended up with only 2 things. And that was something almost everyone we've been talking to has been talking about. And you alluded to it in your story, that what matters most is to be kind. Laura's big word is kindness. And do no harm. So it's interesting that having a focus like that will lead you away from Christianity and away from the organization that's supposed to be about that.
Yeah.
And you also talked about anti-racism, which is really complicated for us, that we're indoctrinated and cultivated, that we had this cultivated ignorance about racism and homophobia. And anti-racism is a complex, hard to get subject. And I finally read the book by Abraham, what's his face? And I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. But then also this past weekend, people in our area are banning books. And one of them was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which is also a deep thing that just wrecked me again. It is part of it that, in your opinion, is part of it that being kind, not harming people, being anti-racist, those things aren't easy, right? I mean, that's really the deal. It's easier to be, certain, in my, yeah, Laura's showing me it's Ibram Kendi.
Yeah. How to be an anti-racist.
But these kind of things are hard, right? I mean, and even the deconstruction journey you alluded to earlier, you said, I'm not going to lie. When it came out, it was difficult, right? There's some tough things I had to go through and do. Can you talk about all my word salad that I just threw out there and make some sense of it for me?
You didn't tell me I'd have to do this. No, okay, I'll push back a little bit on what you said. So I think you said, maybe I don't know if you knew exactly what you're saying. I want to make sure that I heard you correctly, but saying that maybe the reason why people aren't kind or anti-racist or these different things is because it's not easy, right? Like it's hard to do. Is that what you were saying?
Is that was it more of we've been
like I think it was extremely hard for me.
Okay.
Because I was cultivated in that
That's what
ignorance about those subjects. And I would gain a little, like I would, say, well, I have black friends, and that would be, that's enough. But something like anti-racism it's a very tough subject.
Well, part of that is because you have to look at yourself and your privilege as a white, and for you, a straight white male. For me, as a white woman, I still have privilege, that a black woman does not have. Period.
And I think I can be unkind to people and gain followers. But actually being kind and loving my neighbor, loving my enemies is hard. It's not easy. And anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different directions that we could go with that. And I do think, Laura, what you said, is that if we don't want to acknowledge our privilege or we don't want to give up some of our comfort. And I think there's also the element of fear. I think Trump especially plays on people's fears. He makes up things that, I mean, he takes things that they might already naturally be afraid of and then just blows them out of proportion, where you're terrified that this will happen if we don't do this or we don't do that. And there's just very much power. Like all of these things you're seeing now with Roe versus Wade and all in the Supreme Court, people want to be in power. And the thing is, white men have been in power since the very beginning. I mean, this nation was founded on the white men being in power and Black people being enslaved. And so when things start to change, there's a book called White Rage, where anytime Black people or people of color gain any kind of ground, then the white backlash, the white rage. I mean, you saw that after Barack Obama was president. What happened? Like, we go from Obama to Trump. Like, how do you make, because the whole white rage, anger, fear, backlash, all of that. So what I see, what's really interesting to me is growing up, I mean, all the people I was surrounded with were very, very Christian, like very, very solid in their faith, very good moral people. Um, and then you would have other people that are out drinking and cussing and doing all this or whatever, and that's the other group of people. What when Trump came into power, and you see those two groups now are together, where the Christians who were so upset about Bill Clinton and his little thing that he had going on no longer care about those morals. People who would never say a cuss word don't care if Trump cusses, they cuss this. They're all these people are now meshed together when it wouldn't seem like they fit together, but it's what they're against in so many instances is they're against other people having rights, whether it's women having rights or Black people having rights, or there not being inequalities and injustice and all of this. And I mean, it's like I said, we could go on and on and on forever. I encourage people. I don't know if you know that I have an Instagram account called White Girl Learning. I started it in 2017. I've been reading books, like a ton of books my whole entire life. I learned to read when I was 4 and I never stopped. And when we helped plant that church, and then I made more Black friends, and I started realizing, oh, wow, like almost every book on my shelf is by a white author. And when I first started reading books, like primarily by Black authors, Indigenous authors, other authors of color, I would have people push back and say, well, I don't care what color the author's skin is. I just read the book because it's good. And I would say, well, go to your bookshelf and look at all your books and tell me how many books, like what percentage of your books are by white authors. And not very many people took me up on it, but I can tell you that it's like 99%. That's just the default. If you don't intentionally seek out these authors, you mentioned The Bluest Eye. I don't remember I read Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry in 7th grade. I don't remember a single book by a Black author. The rest of my years in high school, never read Toni Morrison. Don't remember ever hearing about Toni Morrison. I just finished the last book in her canon this year, and I started in 2017. And so I'm in my 40s reading Toni Morrison for the first time. She wrote these books in the 70s, and I'm reading them in 2017. So I just encourage people to start reading. Not everyone reads. So whether that's watch something, listen to podcasts, who are you following? But it's really, really, really hard to love people and want equality for all people if you don't know people who are different from you, if you don't know anything about their story. When you talk about stories, that's what this is for me. Like, I read these books, I hear their stories in their own words. And so now all the books behind me that you can see are all books by authors of color. I still read books by white people. It's just a really small percentage.
Trying to catch up. Yeah.
Yes, catching up. I have so much catching up to do. And I think that's the key for all of us. We have a lot of catching up to do, especially, Karl, you mentioned like those beliefs that you were indoctrinated with. First of all, you got to get those out. You got to get new ones. So you're learning and unlearning. It's not easy. It is not comfortable. It's not really very much fun. And yet it's really important. And I tell people I had the luxury, and I use luxury in quotes, of going more slowly because I started this waking up process quite a while ago. If people are just waking up right now, you don't actually have the luxury of going super slow because people are hurting, people are dying, people are being discriminated against. And Martin Luther King Jr. was in a Birmingham jail in the 60s, like 1963, and saying, how long is this going to take? When are these white moderates they would say, well, we need to go slow. You don't need your rights quite yet. We need to go slow on this. We're still saying that. And it's 2024, and people are saying, well, that's a lot. That's a lot for us white people to take on right now. And it is. I will acknowledge that the same way I do with conservative Christian parents whose kids might be queer. I get it. It's hard. You have a lot to lose. My sister disowned me in 2017. I haven't seen her and her husband and their 6 kids since 2016. And it was largely because I became queer affirming and things I said about racism and other stuff. You are going to lose some things. Like you will. And that's the hard part, because a church is often this family and there's so much love, and they say they treat you like a family until you have some ideas or some thoughts or beliefs change, and then they can turn on you like so quickly.
100%.
And I'm seeing that in families too, that families are everything and we love our kids, and then then they get disowned or they get kicked out. I read the Jesus Storybook Bible to my kids when they were little, and I have a poem about how in that storybook Bible, and it's a decent storybook, like it's a decent kids Bible compared to some others, but they're always talking about the unstopping, never giving up love of God, never ever giving up. It's forever and always and always. And we read that and say that until your kid comes out and says, "Mom, I'm gay." And then what? That love stops.
Wants to date someone a different color.
Yeah, it stops there. So, I don't think that I've figured out your word salad or made a lot of sense.
Oh, you did a great job. And when we did the conference last year, we decided to do all women's voices, to elevate. Every single speaker was female, and they said overwhelmingly, because we were talking about what women know about trauma, was how it was subtitled. And they said, several of them said, men read leadership books, and how to manage things and do things like I was doing this morning, writing, what's leadership? What is that? But they said overwhelmingly what they want from men is for men to read their stories and read their survivor stories, especially. So to understand another topic that's kind of dear to our hearts, that's what we're kind of focused on right now, is the trauma that comes from all that stuff, and doesn't get addressed because we're on other missions like paying the church salaries, keeping the building up and all those kind of things.
Something you said, and I don't mean to keep jumping back to Derek Webb. It's just such a fresh podcast that's in my mind. But something you said that
we'll be referring to you next week.
Yeah, that's our next podcast. We will be referring to you. But he said some of the same things that you just said, and it's about being intentional. It's about being intentional, because otherwise, as a society, we will always revert back to or default back to the straight white male narrative.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, he even admitted in his podcast, The Airing of Grief, that he did for about 3 years. He even said that they did, it just is so, it's almost subconscious. You don't realize that you're doing it. He even said that, in their 3rd season, they had to take a really hard look at that, because it is just so ingrained in our culture and our society that is what we default back to, is a straight white male perspective. And so he, like you, literally echoed what he said. We just need to be intentional about, sometimes being in that discomfort. When I read, like it was back, gosh, I don't even know when it was. I've lost like all track of time, but when Black Lives Matter and all that was like happening a few years ago, I read White Fragility, and it was a hard read for me, because I was like, I'm not racist. I'm not this, I'm not that. But you're right. Even, I don't have as many, rights, using air quotes, however you want to word that, as a straight white female, as a straight white male. We've got straight white men telling women what to do with their bodies, which is 100% ridiculous. But, reading that was kind of a hard read for me, but I I felt I needed to read that because I do live in privilege. I do.
Yeah.
And no one wants to admit that. No one wants to admit that they, you know, have had this privilege just for being the color that they are. But it was so eye-opening to me to read that book and just really go, I'm going to read this and I'm going to read this with an open mind. That was a hard thing to do, but it was so necessary for me to do.
Yeah. And it's hard, and then it does get easier.
Yes.
And one thing that I try to point out to people, because you'll get pushback like, well, no, I haven't had an easy life just because I'm white. I had this problem or this whatever. That doesn't mean, white privilege doesn't mean that your life was easy.
That's right.
It means that none of your hardship came because of the color of your
That's right.
skin.
That's right.
So if
Exactly.
you and a Black woman had the same, like everything was the same about you, but then she would have that additional additional oppression because she's Black and a woman, not just because she's a woman. So yeah, and it gets easier, and it's not, here's the thing, like right now I have so many Black friends who write about racism, they teach about this, they educate, and you think about this for a minute, like if your whole life was being spent trying to get other people not to treat you unfairly, like it's what if they want to do something else, like talk about swimming or talk about like art or talk about this or about that, but they have to talk about, don't treat people like this, or don't treat me unfairly, don't this. And so I just wish that that could all go away and that my queer friends didn't have to fight for dignity and rights. They could just have them, and then they could just go be humans who happen to be queer, or humans who happen to be Black, or humans who happen to be whatever. But they don't have to, because people will tell you, well, you wouldn't be colorblind, or I don't see color, or I don't see this, or I don't see that. The harm there is that you don't see the harm that's being done to them then, because you're not seeing that. And in an ideal world, we would see everything. Like we would see color, we would see your hair is different than her hair, we would see the height difference, we would see that one person's skinny and one person's fat. The difference would be all of them would be amazing. Like not one thing would be better than another. It would all be great. But it's not that you don't see it, it's just that it all matters, it all counts, it's all good. And that's not how it is right now. Parents want their kids to be straight, not gay. And it's not just because they don't like gay people, it's they know how hard their kid's life is going to be if they're gay. Black parents have to give their kids a talk when they're really, really young. Like if someone comes up to you and accuses you of something, you have to say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, and give them what they want or whatever. A white kid could be like, get off me, leave me alone. Well, a Black child might get shot for doing that. Is it that extreme all the time? Maybe not 100% of the time, but it happens every single day.
It
and
happens
it's
enough.
Different. Yes. And so, it's once you start learning and waking up to that and reading other people's stories, then it just can become more of a celebratory thing. Like I want Pride Month to be where we share happy stories and Flamey Grant's new video and this and that, not with me begging Christian parents to become affirming and love their kids. How long are we going to talk about the history of racism and everything in this country? Well, it's still continuing. I would love to just celebrate my Black friends and all the things that they're doing. But you can't ignore that history. You can't erase it. And just because slavery ended however many years ago, it is this pipeline that goes all the way through, even with policing. Police in this country were invented and created to return runaway enslaved people. Like that's why. And so often in so many cases, white people are calling the police to protect them from Black people. The police are not there to protect Black people. And again, I'm not being very nuanced here, but it's real and it's happening, and we can live in our little bubbles and think that just because my life is fine, that everything's fine. And that's the comfortable place to be.
Right.
But it's not the kind place to be. It's not the loving place to be. And if you're a Christian and you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself, then you're not following that basic command. And like you said, so many Christians, that Christianity has lost, for many people, lost the whole love part. It's a bunch of hate and not very much love at all.
Yep.
Yeah, and what we continually hear is the victims of racism, the victims of queerphobia, and the victims of just religious abuse and harm are tired of explaining it to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're looking, hoping that allies will come forward and help in this process, because it's, like we've went over a couple of times today, it's real easy to slip in, to a complacency because I'm in charge. And and like Derek explained, it's real easy for me to get back in charge, even when I voluntarily gave it up. Brittany Hartley has a book called Non-Religious Spirituality. We're going to interview her in a couple of weeks, or we'll probably be talking about you and what you said. But she says, one of the really good things is that so many of us are deconstructing, and we're coming to the same conclusions almost intuitively. Because we're not trying to prove a doctrine anymore. We're trying to find truth, and we're asking real questions and things like that. And like you mentioned, reading books that that aren't the typical ones we would read, like just the Bible and a commentary. So anyway.
So I'm going to kind of go off on another branch of this tree and just see, and maybe you have, you don't really know enough about this to have an opinion on it, but like as you were talking, I kept thinking of the disabled population. And how, and mainly that is, I think that's at the forefront of my mind. Karl had a stroke a couple years ago, so he's disabled. We have a disabled grandson. But I see a lot of struggles with that population as well, as far as equal access. I feel so many times that population is an afterthought. Is there some similarities there? I guess I'm asking you.
Absolutely. So in my first book, Unbelieve, I didn't say anything about disabilities. In my second book, I have a section called Disability Justice, but I'm going to read you a poem from that. It's called Glaring Omission. Reading through journal after journal after journal, and nothing anywhere about racism or whiteness or queerness or disability or anything else that didn't directly affect me. I never, ever had to think about it at all. Not one single time. But then I have another one. I mentioned that hole in our gospel book. This is called Full of Holes. Years ago, I read a book called The Hole in Our Gospel and discovered that loving the poor was a missing piece in my faith journey. I just read a book called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request and discovered another gaping hole, disability justice. And I'm going to try to make up for it now. And so in this section, obviously, I did not make up for it in one small section of a book, but I read some books. I started learning some things. I have a poem in there called Past the Expiration Date, where I'm talking about words that we use. And so actually, let me just find this, because one of the biggest words, and I don't do this 100% of the time, but the word lame that is used often to say that something is not cool or dumb, or like, well, even I just said the word dumb, which also means that you can't speak.
Right.
But so this, okay, I'll just read this. Past the expiration date. We can choose violence with our words sometimes without even realizing it. The word lame means unable to walk without difficulty, but we use it to mean disappointing, pathetic, dull, never in a positive context. This is hurtful to our disabled siblings, and it's past time to toss it in the trash. Let's learn about hurtful slurs and expand our vocabulary in a way that honors everyone. And I've heard people get upset and they're like, what's the big deal? And trying to help someone understand that if I cannot walk, then I am lame. And if someone uses that word, what I am, to mean that was boring, that was disappointing, then you're putting that negative thing on me. The same way the word gay used to be used like that when someone would say, well, that's gay. It was not a positive thing.
Right.
It was and so there's so much with language. And that's another thing where people say, well, I can't keep up with all this language, or I can't do this, or I can't use the pronoun they for someone, or all. I get that. It is challenging, but I encourage us to think of all the things we do manage to do, like the things that we do memorize, or the things we
Fantasy
can
football.
remember, or all of these things. And yet that's too hard.
Right.
It's because it doesn't affect me or concern me. But then you're saying, well, then maybe my partner is disabled, or a grandson, or then it affects me, right? But my goal is to care about things before it affects me personally. And one instance of this is I've always had this special place in my heart for single women in the church. I had a lot of single friends who felt left out every Mother's Day, every marriage sermon, all of this. And so I would do things like I had a Galentine's Day thing, invited all the single friends over for Valentine's Day and different things. Well, here I am. Now I am unexpectedly a single woman. I'm not in the church anymore, and I'm glad for that, actually. But anytime we can care about something before it affects us, I think that's a good goal to have. Obviously, we can't do it all. That is hard, but people are so forgiving and kind, like especially the queer community. These friends of mine have forgiven me for the 40 years of my life that I thought they were going to hell. Like they have somehow forgiven me. And many of them also believe that too, which is another layer, that internalized homophobia. But yeah, if we can give ourselves grace, I don't like the word grace anymore, but I haven't come up with a better one to replace it. But we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to get it right. And we cannot do everything and learn everything. But we've got to make an effort. Like we've got to try, and our heart has to be in the right place. And that ability to say that I got this wrong, or I made a mistake. And that's what I didn't have in Christianity, because I was working so hard to never be wrong, to never make a mistake. Once you take that off the table and you say, listen, I might mess up here. Can you tell me if I do? And does it still hurt me when people come to me and tell me I messed up? Yeah, I don't like messing up. That's just my personality on top of all of that. But it's so much better. And then I've got people coming to me that I grew up with. My daughter just came out as gay. What do I do? And I haven't talked to this person in like 25 years, but being the kind of person that people feel safe with, it doesn't require you to be perfect. It requires you to have an open mind, an open heart, to try your best, and to be honest when you do screw up, because you will screw up. How would we not screw up? Like there's just no way. So the more you do it, the less afraid you are of doing it. And I used to be terrified of it, and I'm not anymore.
You know, that's interesting that you said that, because just the other day I was having a conversation with my sister, and I had inadvertently hurt her feelings about something. And it was almost like an out of body experience, because I didn't try to excuse my behavior. I didn't start crying uncontrollably. I didn't try to like beg for her forgiveness. I just said, thank you for telling me that. I had no idea that what I said was hurtful. And I said, and I remember when I was a pastor's wife and people would say things like that to me, and that hurt my feelings. And I said, I don't want to perpetrate the same things to
Yeah.
other people that have been perpetrated to me. So thank you for telling me. Now, did I sit in that and feel some grief in the fact that
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
said something that hurt my sister? Absolutely. But
Mhm.
like you said, the more we are like willing to learn and realize that we're not always going to get it right, I think the more open we are when someone, or at least I will speak for myself, the more open I am than when somebody says, yeah, you didn't quite get that right.
Yeah.
And we can talk about how I can get that right in the future.
Mhm.
Um, it was like one of a conversation that I probably haven't had in a really, really long time. And so it was like,
Mm.
when I say it was kind of like I was on the outside looking in, it's so different than how I probably would have responded 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Totally different. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think if we just leave ourselves open enough to continue to learn from each other,
Yeah.
um, I mean, I don't know. For me, that's a gift. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to continue to learn and to grow. And how can I do things better or different the next time? And not searching for that level of perfection anymore,
Right. Right.
because it's not going
Yeah.
to happen. And I was so tired of living in the facade of perfection.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
Me too.
uh,
Me too.
So Marla,
It's boring too. It's not
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Who cares about perfection?
right, right.
Marla, you've said some powerful things today. You've talked about
Yes.
some powerful issues with passion,
Mm-hmm.
and we appreciate that. We love that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of wisdom in what you said. And so we talked about your books a little bit, and we had
Oh, it's okay.
to talk a lot more about them, but um, they're refreshing. They're kind of, I'm
Yeah.
looking at them right now. They're
Mm-hmm.
different. Um, the cover, can you talk about the covers just a little bit? Is that something you did or something one of your friends did?
My daughter.
Really?
My daughter designed my covers. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
cool.
long story short, I self-published Unbelieve and it had a slightly different cover, and she designed that one too. And then I met David Morris with Lake Drive Books, and I signed with him for Jaded, and she designed that one. So Unbelieve is just a pile of books, and then coming out of Unbelieve are the words Unbelieve, these little streamers kind of. And then Jaded has a woman with her hands over her face
Mm-hmm.
and books and speech bubbles, and got these leaves coming out of Jaded. And then Whole has flowers, and it's someone sitting on a blanket with books out in a meadow or something. So the books are the theme throughout, because that's the thing. This is very much how I changed my mind and my heart are through books. I talk about at the beginning of Unbelieve about that. My dad, there's a poem at the beginning of Unbelieve, bless his heart. My dad wants me to write a blog post detailing all of my theological beliefs and why I believe them, so I can put an end to the confusion and people can stop calling me a heretic. And then I wrote an entire book about how I became a heretic. So that kind of backfired on him. But
Mm,
books are how this all came to be. I started broadening the books that I was reading, not just the white Christian men and occasional white Christian woman. Started reading more, started listening to more. And so um, the journey of the book covers, so all the spines match, the colors, and my daughter is a brilliant artist, and so she's been designing stuff for me for a long time. But again, these books, they're poetry, but if you do, for people who don't love poetry, I would encourage them to check it out anyway. It's very unconventional. Like I said, there's nothing you can't understand. It's basically me taking a long paragraph, chopping out the parts that don't matter as much and putting it into a poem. Some are short and quippy, some are a little bit longer, but it does tell my story of deconstructing from the very good Christian that I used to be all the way to now. And it's been so much fun to connect with people. I started doing poem art where I cut up the poems from my book and I put them on illustrations from kids' books that kind of match what's happening in the poem. Now other people have started doing it. I self-published a little book that's specifically for cutting up, that you can do this poetry. And it has been, you talk about trauma, like it has been healing. I'm reading a book right now about how art is healing, and how doing art and seeing art it does a lot to your brain and the things that have happened in your brain. And I can physically feel good things happening in my body when I cut these poems out and glue them and laminate them, and using my hands and reading the words again. And other people have been doing it. I don't know. It's hard to crystallize that and what it all means. And I'm just getting started, I feel like. But I know that we can heal from this. And as we heal, we can help others heal. And that's what I want to do, is kind of like this big sister, a little farther ahead on the journey than a lot of other people are. And the messages that they send me about these books and how they resonated with them, I can't describe it. I wouldn't trade it for anything that I have been through. Even my divorce and all that, which we didn't talk a whole lot about, but it's been really something. And I used to call this like a God thing, like the things that would happen. Oh, that was a God thing. I don't know how to explain this. This is partly why I cannot be an atheist, is I don't know how to explain some of the things that come out of my head and onto the page. I don't know how to explain the connections with people. I don't know how to explain the things that have happened to me. So there's something, but we are all connected in some kind of way by some kind of something. But not having to figure it out, not having to put a label on it, not having to fit it in a box, and being able to love everyone. Like, that is wild to me. And I tell people, I don't care what you believe, as long as your beliefs aren't harming people. And so I've got friends who are pastors. I've got friends who are atheists. I have friends who are Muslim. All of these people, and the connecting force is love. Like we love, and we want each other to be whole and free. And it's just, it's so great. Like, that's what I want people to know. It's so incredible.
Yeah, our trauma is stored in our body. And I think that's why a lot of why art and writing and poetry and some of these things seems to help with our trauma, even color for some people. It's like when we're young. And we have two more questions. We're going to try to make them quick. We don't want to all day here. But the one question is something we ask most people, and we don't prepare you for, but it's the billboard question. What would you put on your billboard if you wanted it to reach the whole world and you had so many words? Laura said there's no limit to the amount of words you could put on because it's your billboard. But what do you want the world to know? If you could send them one message. I feel like it's better if we spring it on people than if we prepare them for it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna steal this from my friend Trey Ferguson. He's a Black pastor in Miami, Florida, and we've become really good friends. Okay. But he defines love as the commitment to wholeness, and so I love that, because it doesn't mean you're trying to change anybody. You're committed to them being whole. So I would say on my billboard, I am committed to your wholeness, is what I would say. So instead of the billboards that are around here sometimes that repent or say this prayer or Jesus is coming, right?
You're going to hell.
I am committed to your wholeness. That's what I would say. I would say a lot more, but I realize billboards have to be short and sweet so that people can read the whole thing. So,
Or they can pull off to the side of the road and read a really say be flexible. So, well, how can people get a hold of you, and where can they find your books?
My books can be found wherever you find books. So maybe not in your local bookstore unless you request them there, which is always fun. But bookshop.org, Amazon, lakedrivebooks.com. I mean, you can even get them like on Target and Walmart, all those places, not in the stores, but on
Sure.
the website.
Right.
And my website is marlataviano.com. It needs some updates. I hang out most of the time on Instagram at Marla Taviano and at White Girl Learning. And Threads is becoming a place that I also like. And so I'm at Marla Taviano there. But there's a contact form on my website. Oh, I also have a Substack, and it's marlataviano.substack.com. And we didn't talk about this. We'll have to do another interview sometime, but
Sure.
it's called Writing Wholefarted is the name of my Substack.
Okay. Yes. Right. Because I read that and I said we were going to talk about that.
We got too serious there. We didn't get to the fun stuff.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, this has been great. This has been amazing. Amazing conversation. Yeah.
And we appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming out, and now we know you better.
Yeah.
And share in the future, and hopefully do this again.
Yes, for sure.
For the listeners out there, we want to thank you for tuning in. The book Evolving from Religious Trauma is out, and it's a soft release. Let us know if you can't afford that. We'd like to help you get that book. But Marla's book, the new book, is called Whole, along with Unbelieve and Jaded. Like she said, that you can find anywhere. I encourage you to pick them up. And just the parts that I read, I enjoyed, and I've enjoyed what she shared today. So,
yeah, absolutely.
As always, we encourage you to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.